Chapter 24. The next morning they followed the ridgeline that angled off toward the east. The wintry sky above them was an icy blue, and there was no warmth to the sun. Reld kept his eyes veiled against the light and muttered prayers as he rode to ward off his panic. Several times they saw dust clouds far off on the desolation of the sand and salt flats to the south, but they were unable to determine whether the clouds were caused by Mergo patrols or vagrant winds. About noon the wind shifted and blew in steadily from the south. A ponderous cloud, black as ink, blotted out the jagged line of peaks lying along the southern horizon. It moved toward them with a kind of ominous inexorability, and the flickers of lightning glimmered in its sooty underbelly. "That's a bad storm coming, Belgarath," Beric rumbled, staring at the cloud. Belgarath shook his head. "It's not a storm," he replied. "It's ashfall. That volcano out there is erupting again, and the wind's blowing the ash this way." Beric made a face, then shrugged. "At least we won't have to worry about being seen once it starts," he said. "The Grolums won't be looking for us with their eyes, Beric," Aunt Paul reminded him. Belgarath scratched at his beard. "We'll have to take steps to deal with that, I suppose." "This is a large group to shield, Father," Aunt Paul pointed out, "and that's not even counting the horses." "I think you can manage it, Paul. You are always very good at it." "I can hold up my side as long as you can hold up yours, old wolf." "I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to help you, Paul. Tushik himself is looking for us. I've felt him several times already, and I'm going to have to concentrate on him. If he decides to strike at us, he'll come very fast. I'll have to be ready for him, and I can't do that if I'm all tangled up in a shield." "I can't do it alone, Father," she protested. "Nobody can enclose this many men and horses without help." "Geryon can help you." "Me?" Geryon jerked his eyes off the looming cloud to stare at his grandfather. "He's never done it before, Father," Aunt Paul pointed out. "He's going to have to learn sometime." "This is hardly the time or place for experimentation. He'll do just fine. Walk him through it a time or two until he gets the hang of it." "Exactly what am I supposed to do?" Geryon asked apprehensively. Aunt Paul gave Belgarath a hard look, then turned to Geryon. "I'll show you, dear," she said. "The first thing you have to do is stay calm. It really isn't all that difficult." "But you just said—" "Never mind what I said, dear. Just pay attention." "What do you want me to do?" he asked doubtfully. "The first thing is to relax," she replied, "and think about sand and rock." "That's all?" "Just do that first. Concentrate." He thought about sand and rock. "No, Geryon, not white sand. Black sand, like the sand all around us." "You didn't say that." "I didn't think I had to." Belgarath started to laugh. "Do you want to do this, Father?" she demanded crossly. Then she turned back to Geryon. "Do it again, dear. Try to get it right this time." He fixed it in his mind. "That's better," she told him. "Now, as soon as you get sand and rock firmly in your mind, I want you to sort of push the idea out in a half circle so that it covers your entire right side. I'll take care of the left." He strained with it. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. "Don't push quite so hard, Geryon. You're wrinkling it. And it's very hard for me to make the seams match when you do that. Just keep it steady and smooth." "I'm sorry." He smoothed it out. "How does it look, Father?" she asked the old man. Geryon felt a tentative push against the idea he was holding. "Not bad, Paul," Belgrath replied. "Not bad at all. The boy's got talent." "Just exactly what are we doing?" Geryon asked. In spite of the chill, he felt sweat standing out on his forehead. "We're making a shield," Belgrath told him. "You enclose yourself in the idea of sand and rock, and it merges with the real sand and rock all around us. When Grolms go looking for things with their minds, they're looking for men and horses. They'll sweep right past us because all they'll see here is more sand and more rock." "That's all there is to it?" Geryon was quite pleased with how simple it was. "There's a bit more, dear," Aunt Paul said. "We're going to extend it now so that it covers all of us. Go out slowly, a few feet at a time." That was much less simple. He tore the fabric of the idea several times before he got it pushed out as far as Aunt Paul wanted it. He felt a strange merging of his mind with hers along the center of the idea where the two sides joined. "I think we've got it now, Father," Aunt Paul said. "I told you he could do it, Paul." The purple-black cloud was rolling ominously up the sky toward them, and the faint rumbles of thunder growled along its leading edge. "If that ash is anything like what it was in Nyissa, we're going to be wandering blind out here, Belgarath," Beric said. "Don't worry about it," the sorcerer replied. "I've got a lock on Rakthal. The Grolms aren't the only one who can locate things that way. Let's move out." He started along the ridge as the cloud blotted out the sky overhead. The thunder shocks were a continuous rumble, and lightning seethed in the boiling cloud. The lightning had an arid, crackling quality about it as the billions of tiny particles seethed and churned, building enormous static discharges. Then the first specks of drifting ash began to settle down through the icy air. As Belgrath led them down off the ridge and out onto the sand flats. By the end of the first hour, Garen found that holding the image in his mind had grown easier. It was no longer necessary to concentrate all his attention on it, as it had been at first. By the end of the second hour, it had become no more than tedious. To relieve the boredom of it, as they rode through the thickening ashfall, he thought of one of the huge skeletons they had passed when they had entered the wasteland. Painstakingly, he constructed one of them and placed it in the image he was holding. On the whole, he thought it looked rather good, and it gave him something to do. "Garion," Aunt Paul said crisply, "please don't try to be creative." "What?" "Just stick to sand. The skeleton's very nice, but it looks a bit peculiar with only one side." "One side?" "There wasn't a skeleton on my side of the image, just yours. Keep it simple, Garion. Don't embellish." They rode on, their faces muffled to keep the choking ash out of their mouths and noses. Garen felt a tentative push against the image he was holding. It seemed to flutter against his mind, feeling almost like the wriggling touch of the tadpoles he had once caught in the hand at Falder's farm. "Hold it steady, Garion," Aunt Paul warned. "That's a Grolm." Did he see us? No. There, he's moving on now. And the fluttering touch was gone. They spent the night in another of the piles of broken rock that had dotted the wasteland. Dernick once again devised a kind of low, hollowed-out shelter of piled rock and anchored down tent cloth. They took a cold supper of bread and dried meat and built no fire. Garion and Aunt Paul took turns holding the image of empty sand over them like an umbrella. He discovered that it was much easier when they weren't moving. The ash was still falling the next morning, but the sky was no longer the inky black it had been the day before. "I think it's thinning out, Belgarath," Silk said as they saddled their horses. "If it blows over, we'll have to start dodging patrols again." The old man nodded. "We'd better hurry," he agreed. "There's a place I know of where we can hide, about 5 miles north of the city. I'd like to get there before this ashfall subsides. You can see for 10 leagues in any direction from the walls of Rakthal." "Are the walls so high, then?" Manderlin asked. "Higher than you can imagine." "Higher even than the walls of Elmimber?" "10 times higher. 50 times higher. You'll have to see it to understand." They rode hard that day. Garion and Aunt Paul held their shield of thought in place, but the searching touches of the Grolms came more frequently now. Several times the push against Garion's mind was very strong, and came without warning. "They know what we're doing, Father," Aunt Paul told the old man. "They're trying to penetrate the screen." "Hold it firm," he replied. "You know what to do if one of them breaks through." She nodded, her face grim. "Warn the boy." She nodded again, then turned to Garion. "Listen to me carefully, dear," she said gravely. "The Grolms are trying to take us by surprise. The best shield in the world can be penetrated if you hit it quickly enough and hard enough. If one of them does manage to break through, I'm going to tell you to stop. When I say stop, I want you to erase the image immediately and put your mind completely away from it." "I don't understand." "You don't have to. Just do exactly as I say. If I tell you to stop, pull your thought out of contact with mine instantly. I'll be doing something that's very dangerous, and I don't want you getting hurt. Can't I help?" "No, dear, not this time." They rode on. The ashfall grew even thinner, and the sky overhead turned a hazy yellowish blue. The ball of the sun, pale and round like a full moon, appeared not far above the southwestern horizon. Geryon, stop! What came was not a push, but a sharp stab. Geryon gasped and jerked his mind away, throwing the image of sand from him. Aunt Paul stiffened, and her eyes were blazing. Her hand flickered a short gesture, and she spoke a single word. The surge Geryon felt as her will unleashed was overpowering. With a momentary dismay, he realized that his mind was still linked to hers. The merging that had held the image together was too strong, too complete to break. He felt himself drawn with her as their still joined minds lashed out like a whip. They flashed back along the faint trail of thought that had stabbed at the shield, and they found its origin. They touched another mind, a mind filled with the exultation of discovery. Then, sure of her target now, Aunt Paul struck with the full force of her will. The mind they had touched flinched back, trying to break off the contact, but it was too late for that now. Garen could feel the other mind swelling, expanding unbearably. Then it suddenly burst, exploding into gibbering insanity, shattering as horror upon horror overwhelmed it. There was flight then, blind shrieking flight across dark stones of some kind. A flight with the single thought of a dreadful final escape. The stones were gone, and there was a terrible sense of falling from some incalculable height. Garen wrenched his mind away from it. "I told you to get clear," Aunt Paul snapped at him. "I couldn't help it. I couldn't get loose." "What happened?" Silk's face was startled. "A Grelm broke through," she replied. "Did he see us?" "For a moment. It doesn't matter. He's dead now." "You killed him? How?" "He forgot to defend himself. I followed his thought back." "He went crazy," Garen said in a choked voice, still filled with the horror of the encounter. "He jumped off something very high. He wanted to jump. It was the only way he could escape from what was happening to him." Garen felt sick. "It was awfully noisy, Paul," Belgrass said with a pained expression. "You haven't been that clumsy in years." "I had this passenger." She gave Garen an icy look. "It wasn't my fault," Garen protested. "You were holding on so tight I couldn't break loose. You had us all tied together." "You do that sometimes, Paul," Belgrath told her. "The contact gets a little too personal, and you seem to want to take us permanent residents. It has to do with love, I imagine." "Do you have any idea what they're talking about?" Barrack asked Silk. "I wouldn't even want to guess." Aunt Paul was looking thoughtfully at Garion. "Perhaps it was my fault," she admitted finally. "You're going to have to let go someday, Paul," Belgrath said gravely. "Perhaps, but not just yet." "You'd better put the screen back up," the old man suggested. "They know we're out here now, and they'll be looking for us." She nodded. "Think about sand again, Garion." The ash continued to settle as they rode through the afternoon, obscuring less and less with each passing mile. They were able to make out the shapes of the jumbled piles of rock around them, and a few rounded spires of basalt thrusting up out of the sand. As they approached another of the low rock ridges that cut across the wasteland at regular intervals, Garion saw something dark and enormously high looming in the haze ahead. "We can hide here until dark," Belgrass said, dismounting behind the ridge. "Are we there?" Dunnick asked, looking around. "That's Rakthal," the old man pointed at the ominous shadow. Beric squinted at it. "I thought that was just a mountain." "It is. Rakthal's built on top of it." "It's almost like Prolgu then, isn't it?" "The locations are similar, but Tuchik the magician lives here. That makes it quite different from Prolgu." "I thought Tuchik was a sorcerer," Garion said, puzzled. "Why do you keep calling him a magician?" "It's a term of contempt," Belgrath replied. "It's considered a deadly insult in our particular society." They picketed their horses among some large rocks on the back side of the ridge, and climbed the 40 or so feet to the top, where they took cover to watch and wait for nightfall. As the settling ash thinned even more, the peak began to emerge from the haze. It was not so much a mountain as a rock pinnacle towering up out of the wasteland. Its base, surrounded by a mass of shattered rubble, was fully 5 miles around, and its sides were sheer and black as night. "How high doth it reach?" Manderolin asked, his voice dropping almost unconsciously into a half-whisper. "Somewhat more than a mile," Belgarath replied. A steep causeway rose sharply from the floor of the wasteland to encircle the upper 1,000 or so feet of the Black Tower. "I imagine that took a while to build," Barrick noted. "Almost 1,000 years," Belgarath answered. "While it was under construction, the Murgos bought every slave the Nysans could put their hands on." "A grim business," Manderolin observed. "It's a grim place," Belgarath agreed. As the chill breeze blew off the last of the haze, the shape of the city perched atop the crag began to emerge. The walls were as black as the sides of the pinnacle, and black turrets jutted out from them, seeming at random. Dark spires rose within the walls, stabbing up into the evening sky like spears. There was a foreboding, evil air about the black city of the Grolums. It perched, brooding atop its peak, looking out over the savage wasteland of sand, rock, and sulphur-reeking bogs that encircled it. The sun, sinking into the banks of cloud and ash along the jagged western rim of the wasteland, bathed the grim fortress above them in a sooty crimson glow. The walls of Rakthal seemed to bleed, as if all the blood that had been spilled on all the altars of Torak since the world began had been gathered together to stain the dread city above them, and that all the oceans of the world would not be enough to wash it clean.